Every day, massive cargo ships push through heavy, isolated ocean swells to keep global trade alive. The seafarers operating these vessels endure long contracts, separated from their families by thousands of miles of open water. For centuries, the psychological toll of traversing oceans was entirely ignored. Extreme stress, months of profound loneliness, and the heavy burden of responsibility were treated as unavoidable occupational hazards. Recently, the tide turned. The maritime industry pivoted aggressively toward wellness, marketing digital apps, online resilience courses, and pre-joining psychological forms directly to crews. Shipping companies showcase these platforms as definitive proof of corporate care. They deploy them to satisfy compliance checklists and appease auditors, presenting a modern, compassionate front. But what looks like care on paper operates very differently in practice. The industry has commodified seafarer vulnerability, transforming welfare tools into an unregulated marketplace of corporate surveillance. The interaction usually begins quietly. A typical crew wellness app asks simple, seemingly benign questions about daily step counts, physical fitness routines, and sleep schedules. To drive participation, these platforms rely on gamification. They award points, digital badges, and status levels to incentivize seafarers to log in daily and engage with the software. Once that habit is established, the prompts escalate. The questions pivot from physical fitness to highly personal inquiries about emotional triggers, mood stability, and family stress back home. On paper, participation in these surveys is entirely optional. In practice, the stark power imbalance between an employer and a contract worker on a ship means many crew members feel coerced into answering to maintain their professional standing. Younger seafarers often treat the process like a game. They unknowingly barter their private behavioral data for virtual rewards, feeding an opaque pipeline of personal information. Independent academic research confirms the danger of this data collection. A 2019 study published in the JAMA Network Open examined the structural risks inherent in mental health apps. The researchers identified severe vulnerabilities. Private psychological details are frequently routed into insecure storage and shared with third-party vendors. Information entered in confidence then leaks straight into the hands of crewing managers deciding the seafarer's next contract. And the threat extends beyond digital apps. Handwritten clinical checklists, unencrypted Excel files, and basic online surveys expose sensitive psychiatric details just as easily. Across both digital and analog formats, the maritime industry lacks robust safeguards. Independent third-party penetration testing is rare, and transparent rules regarding how long this data is retained are practically non-existent. Without verifiable cybersecurity audits and strict data flow accountability, an app's privacy statement offers no actual protection. It functions merely as a marketing brochure designed to mask corporate oversight. This push for psychological data has now moved from corporate initiatives to state-level regulation. In 2024, India's Directorate General of Shipping amended the Merchant Shipping Medical Examination Rules. These rules mandate that seafarers undergo psychometric tests before joining a vessel. They must explicitly disclose any past psychiatric history, submit to detailed questioning about substance use, and report previous suicide attempts. When an industry mandates the collection of highly sensitive medical data, it raises immediate questions. Who ultimately has access to these files? And how will emotional stability scores influence a seafarer's career progression? In Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation classifies mental health as a special category requiring explicit consent. On paper, this provides strong rights for the crew. But the shipping industry is entirely globalized. Most large merchant marine fleets are managed from crewing hubs in Asia, where data privacy safeguards are heavily fragmented and enforcement is weak. Once the data leaves the seafarer's hands, it is essentially gone. Forcing mandatory medical disclosure across these fractured legal jurisdictions turns mental health into a compliance checklist. It becomes a risky performance filter rather than a mechanism for genuine support. The impact of this system is measurable. Occupational psychology studies by Lefkowitz and Beghi document consistently high rates of depression and burnout among modern crews, linked directly to workplace stressors. Instead of alleviating this crisis, the current approach has triggered a behavioral backfire. Seafarers now actively avoid seeking psychological help because they fear a diagnosis will jeopardize their employment contracts and certifications. The tools meant to improve welfare are generating their own specific anxiety. Experts define this as technostress, a severe psychological burden caused by constant digital check-ins and mandatory workplace monitoring. This mistrust permanently deepened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Broken corporate communication and heavy-hand monitoring left crews feeling alienated rather than protected. Companies pour resources into digital dashboards and resilience workshops while completely ignoring the structural roots of the problem: brutal working hours, prolonged isolation, and poor management practices on board. The very digital tools engineered to monitor stress are mechanically generating a culture of fear and concealment, accelerating the burnout they claim to cure. George Orwell warned that surveillance is rarely introduced by force. It is almost always justified under the promise of protection and safety. We see the practical reality of this dynamic at sea today. Officers report sharing a diagnosis in strict confidence, only to later find their crewing managers holding paperwork listing them as depressed. The core danger facing seafarers is no longer limited to physical isolation or dangerous weather. Their personal identity and internal psychological state are being actively harvested. This new marketplace of maritime welfare fails because it extracts value from the crew. It prioritizes data harvesting and compliance metrics over actual human healing. If the industry intends to support its people, it requires an immediate structural reset. First, all digital welfare tools and psychological disclosures are strictly voluntary. Second, a strict privacy-first mandate must be enforced. Employers should only ever receive binary fitness outcomes, a simple fit or unfit for duty, while remaining completely blinded to the raw psychiatric data. Third, regulators must demand accountability. Governing bodies need to publish and enforce strict rules for data usage, backed by mandatory third-party cybersecurity audits. Finally, the solutions must be driven by the crew. True support requires confidential, shore-based counseling helplines and peer-to-peer networks, not gamified corporate dashboards. Mental health is a moral imperative, not a business model. Until the maritime industry prioritizes trust and confidentiality over compliance metrics, these digital tools will remain exactly what they are: surveillance dressed as care.